Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight? Aha! Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Hey there, welcome to Why We Roll, a tabletop role-playing game design podcast.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Dance Macabre, and Wythe Marshall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Throughout the show, Chris and Wythe hope to amplify new creative voices. We'll chat with different TTRPG designers, focusing on the world of indie games.
We take a curious approach to game design, working through a range of mechanical and narrative questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games just so powerful.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
And we're live.
All right.
With Ethan Gouldini.
Yeah, right.
What's up, Ethan?
How you do?
All right, I'm all right. Hey, everybody. Chris, you wanna do a little intro of why we roll the show?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome back, hopefully, to Why We Roll. We're here recording, talking about tabletop role-playing games, the mechanics, the games themselves, why we make them, what brings us to them. And yeah, today on the show we have Ethan Gouldini, who is an illustrator and also a games writer, as I understand.
Ethan Gould, good friend of mine. I really appreciate working with you over the years on many projects, but I know you're a big game person, a game aficionado, and you knew I was into RPGs. But it wasn't actually until more recently, still several years ago now, but that we started working together on RPGs. Thought I'd have you on. I feel like we have so much to talk about. Chris is also, an artist and medievalist. So I thought the three of us could have a great conversation about, what makes good or bad or interesting or whatever RPG art, and questions about genre. Those are sort of two big topics. But before we dive into any of that, Ethan, do you want to just sort of talk about your background, what you're up to, give folks a sense of who you are?
Sure. My name is Ethan Gould. I often go professionally as Ethan Gouldini. I'm an illustrator and a writer. I usually just use the blanket term artist to just cover all the things. My primary interest is mostly in the sort of, I guess, when something is a symbol or when something is just a bunch of lines on the page, they kind of are basically the same thing in a drawing. And I'm really, really interested in that moment when the brain goes, aha, yes, I know what that object is. And like, how much can I get away with confusing that up until that moment of clarity? I really, really like genre fiction a lot. A lot of my illustrative output these days is genre fiction. It's sci-fi, it's fantasy. And like over the past couple of years, I've sort of had a renewed interest in those interests, which were very near and dear to my heart growing up. I talk with family a lot about how these days sci-fi and fantasy have a huge resurgence and like a renewed popularity in mainstream. And, I am both very gratified in the sense that like so many people are interested in seeing art and like reading stuff about that these days. And I'm also insanely jealous of them that like children growing up today just get to have all of it and not have it be sequestered in a friend's basement. There's that seediness of the original material, and the experience of having it back in the 80s and 90s feels very different than it does today, presumably. And I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, I definitely share that sentiment with you, where it's just like, oh, it's fine to engage with nerd culture now, but when I was 12, 13, trying to get friends to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I grew up in North Texas, so they thought it was devil worship kind of stuff back in the day. Yeah, you had to do it in the basement. You had to hide that stuff away. It's not fair.
Yeah, that additional religiosity charge is one that I've only heard about. That sounds super intense.
Yeah.
But again, adds an extra clandestine charge to everything, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So Can you tell us a little about your background, as an artist, both writer, illustrator? I know you also you have made really cool puppets and designed lots of sets and done many other things, voice acting. So what are some other things you've worked on? And maybe that leads into TTRPGs, or we can do a separate, how you and I started working together thing.
Yeah, so I first moved to New York City a trillion years ago. My initial background was in a lot of other things. I went to school initially for science and decided that was not my cup of tea, so I moved over into literature. And fortunately, across from the neuroscience and physics department at the University of Rochester was a really lovely English department. So taking one of the underground chambers in this frozen world, also a very charming building. So I started concentrating in English literature and film theory. And I sort of fell in love with medieval fiction, especially the Breton lays and all of this really just sort of like whatever the wildest and weirdest like tales that were told, and like the really weird complicated politics of how they were exchanged between cultures and different classes, and how miraculously it still survives today. So you can read about like basically the 12th century's version of anime, where people's horses are exploding underneath them as they're leaping, fighting for 20 hours and getting into weird complicated romances with fey courts. And I never really sort of never lost that sort of like love for it. I was sort of very grateful to go to school at a time period when it was like, oh yeah, this is all, like whether it's like the doggerels or whatever from a certain time period, it's all on the table, everything, all of it. So like being able to write coachingly about, oh, this DuckTales episode that is about King Arthur's court, and what does that mean for like getting like story transmission, blah blah blah. But like professionally, I started after graduating in doing theater. I did theater and props work. I really love puppeteering. My sort of graduation project for college was a really weird puppet show, but it couldn't just be a puppet show. It was like a fake puppet show. It was trying to pretend that it was the lost cassette of an 80s puppet show that had been lost to obscurity. So that's sort of how I like already. It's like, how many levels of fake can you just like enclose something in until suddenly like that seediness like is validated? It turns out it's never validated. It's always strange and weird.
So puppetry and postmodernity doesn't work out the way that you want it to then.
Yes and no. It's puppetry is great because they're so it's like, I don't know, it's like the alt artists, alt art. It's like it's people love it. Like they universally are so fixated on it because it like it brings back these like deep memories from childhood, and it is like it's so specific, and it's like the skills used to make it and do it, like literally anybody can do it. I don't know. It's like I'm gonna just start gushing about puppetry now, I guess.
This isn't a puppetry podcast.
Damn it! No,
link it back.
Like, okay, well, it's like there should, I feel like, be more postmodern acceptance of it. I feel like it has all of this incredible potential in terms of like inhabited characters and roles and all this stuff. Anyway, I love it a lot. Unfortunately, like due to health reasons, I had to kind of stop doing it. And I've always been a drawer, and so I started doing more and more behind the scenes work and doing building, and then I started just doing illustration and 2D drawing art, and that's sort of where I've been mostly located since then. I think that drawing art and illustration are different disciplines, but they're pretty much almost totally overlapped. And illustration is I like my illustration weird. But it's been really excited to working on games doing it because it requires more clarity. Illustration, more than like fine art, does require this real clarity of intent. There have to be the people in the place doing the thing. And I literally had to go to grad school to learn how to do that because like the inside of my head is a surrealist manifesto. So like learning how people see the world and how they interact with fiction like brought me all the way back around to like childhood of like, yep, this is where imagination is. This is what people enjoy, and it's really exciting to do
it. We'll bring this up later when we talk about some of the medieval stuff. But I love the idea of describing the lays or like right now I'm reading through like the Chanson de Guest or de Geste. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. The French,
Neither
cycles of
do
Charlemagne. Yeah, nobody knows. But yeah, like the cycles of Charlemagne, the Song of Roland, all of that stuff. It does read like anime, and there is some incredible high drama that you can pull from those stories that it still exists in fiction today, and it's such a rich ground for fantasy role-playing games to look at those sources and to draw from them.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's also the idea that's worth tapping into about some of the older source material, which like for me has never been as much as like I know Stephen Aubrey, our editor, also really loves like the Lays and the Arthurian sort of saga. But I got really into like the Crusades and reading like the Caliphate's version of events of like random dudes from France came today, killed a bunch of people. That sucked. So now we're fighting them. Here's how that's going. And like they're very sort of matter of fact, but it's very different. It's not like a romantic saga, but it's still like very interesting. It's all about sort of heroic nobles. So it feels very Dragon Ball, very anime. Like I know what you mean. It's like such and such came onto the field, and then a long description of this like specific person from 1,000 years ago who was essentially just some, I'm sure, horrible person in chainmail with a big, mace. But they're all battling each other and essentially yelling Dragon Ball style, like "Get the fuck off my lawn!" And I think there's something about like these books, these stories, these histories are talked about in this highfalutin way, and then there's other content that's like for kids, and it's like I don't know, man. I don't think actually humans have changed that much, unfortunately. Like they're still bashed each other's skulls in, and I think games can kind of play with some of those registers of like when is this actually just like this is silly, right, guys? But yeah, anyway, it's great that I think it's interesting that so many game designers now have a little historical training. I imagine that was always the case. I just wasn't an adult and a game designer, so I didn't know. But it's really interesting to find out like, oh, you too have actually read history. So it's not all coming from sort of Lord of the Rings, right? You're not referencing someone else's interpretation of history. You're also able to go back to the original sources. So that's something we can kind of come back to, Ethan, like not just in Western European, history, but like other things that you have primary knowledge of as an artist when you go to write or draw. So I think that's something, like you said, your head is the Surrealist Manifesto. I'd like to hear more about like the things that you look at. I know like we were just working with another illustrator and Ethan sent like just a bunch of pictures of crystals. It was like, here's crystals that I think are probably on your desk, right?
Yeah, they're just, well, I mean, they're on the, specimen cabinet that I built on my desk, but yeah,
right.
The same thing.
And not like in a goop crystal sense, but like these are just really interesting geometric forms.
That
right?
you know about.
That I know about.
Yeah, that you know about. This one's used for healing your chakra.
That sounds cool. I want that one.
I mean, that would be nice if that actually existed.
Yeah.
No, we're not gonna
Somebody's working on that now with plasmons and excitons and all that, superconducting stuff. One day there'll just be a shape that like does things just by being a cool shape. I don't think we know what that is yet. But so in terms of TTRPGs and art, Ethan, do you want to talk about like that experience? Because I feel like you and I have talked about how that was different than other kinds of art. I mean, you alluded to some of it, like representationality.
I mean, it's interesting because it's like I feel like I have these very coming from, and like the divisions between these things are so incredibly stupid. It really just comes down to like where your paycheck comes from or who represents you. But like coming from an in quotes sort of like fine or conceptual art background, like I have very particular like needs as an artist, and so while I've enjoyed doing illustration professionally, like there are certain, I don't know how to describe it, like there are just certain ways that people and objects and like scenes are depicted that it took, I had to like do a lot of like searching and talking to other illustrators and connecting with other game illustrators to really start like getting my bearing with it. But I think that more than other kinds of illustration to a certain extent, I feel like RPG or TTRPG illustration has been very rewarding, because the idea of like this object needs to be isolated because it needs a call out box and we need to describe it, and like then Wythe will write the language about it, or it's like we need to depict like this very poetic language about an impossible object in the future, or it's like, this is a magic crystal, what does it do, how do you get the vibe of what it's supposed to be across. It's like it gets more at this idea of like a thing has to be more than a thing. Like things are sort of, they can be in a scene with like a full depiction of like a moment in time, or like they have to be something a little bit closer even to conceptual, or like not conceptual, concept art, where you have to sort of explore what the form of an object means if it comes from a particular realm or planet or is held by a certain woman or species. It's, yeah, I feel like that has been very satisfying come to it, and that's the part that sort of got me jazzed about learning more about it.
Very cool. Is there what do you think the ratio of like representation to abstraction is in the work that you've been doing for RPGs, in terms of like, I think about this a lot as well, because I'm also an illustrator. I'm also illustrating my own game. And there's a lot of like, yeah, how do you get a vibe? How do you get like an aura across to somebody? How do you get that feeling of an object, even though you're just representing it on the page? What are some of the approaches that you take to that?
That's really interesting. It's funny because I've been finding I'm illustrating a fantasy game that Wythe and I are doing dev on, and I sort of like, it's actually based on stories from undergrad, but I'm finding that fantasy actually requires much more of that depictive energy even than sci-fi, and I don't know if it's because like because of J.R. Tolkien, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like people already have this sort of like, as Wythe, you were saying, like this fake idea of history in their head, or like the way that in quotes like magical past might have been, and so like trying to distinguish from how it's already been, you have to be like, no, it's not. The the houses don't all look like Tudor houses. They have to look, so then you have to like describe specifically, like, okay, well, if it's not going to look like Dragon Game, then how do you draw Corbell in a house like that? Oh God, I have to learn architecture. Crap.
Yeah. I'm going through that right now.
It and it's like, I think that with working on like Stillfleet specifically, because it's drawing on like this very long tradition of sci-fi, and it takes place so far in the future, it's been a pretty decent balance of like coming at it with my understanding of technology and like landscapes and people as they are, and then being able to sort of like, I guess futz with representation here and there, and like I'm pleased to say, after like what 2.5, 3 years of working on it now, like things are finally starting to look like what they are. But yeah, I think it's been an ongoing process for me, in short.
Well, so can you describe some of the work, just again, for if someone is not as familiar with Stillfleet, some of the work you've done for Stillfleet over the years? Because yeah, you and I are friends. We've worked together on other art projects with writing, where we had an idea like Suspicious Anatomy. We did a book of fake neuroscience, which is your idea. Mostly my words, all your art, and then I laid it out with our friend Patrick's help, creating a nice template. And that's a little bit similar, actually, thinking about it, skipping ahead a decade and a half to Stillfleet. It's like mostly my words, mostly your art. There's other people involved. But, again, you were coming to TTRPGs having played every other nerd game, but not spent as much time in that world, and thinking about, how you wanted to work as a fine artist and what's representational and how does it play in the sort of game, like didactic space of like learning rules for stuff or learning lore.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you did? I mean, I could gush about all kinds of cool stuff you did, but do you want to highlight just some cool pieces and how you approached them? Maybe I'm curious about like the craft, since I am not good at drawing.
Sure.
So throw that out there.
So I approached it like I feel like there were sort of two processes. I mean, they're kind of the same thing, just in like different directions. One of the first pieces of art that I did for the book was what turned into the cover, which was the depiction of Spindle, like the big sort of galactic, hub, this massive spaceship which just sort of hangs in space, that is the last refuge of humanity, put together by Question Mark, but then is used by like the Sinister Co. To connect all these different like other locations across the galaxy or universe, which is sort of the central tenet of the game, of how players go on ventures to do stuff, is they go through Stiffworks, these portal doors that a certain character class can activate, and then from Spindle they will go to other places. I really, really liked the idea of like, the theme of like an overarching, there is like your boss is the bad guy, of course they've got like this central bureaucracy, and so the idea of them having one area that they have sort of seized control and are running things from, like I really like the kind of purity of that. Like it all thematically like lines up. So the first thing that I did for that was work on Spindle, and so that was really trying to like dig into the text and try and like I think really do like a whole bunch of different like versions of iterating until like the lines and sort of like the weird shape in space, like it's described as almost a nudibranch in a nebula. And then from there did the sort of classic process of like starting to render and like do a couple of studies, and finally hit on the thing that was like I felt a good balance of trying to convey scale and like get at this really kind of grody, very retro kind of texture, for what the outside of a place that you're technically not even supposed to see the outside of as. So that was a very like pleasing process of like, starting with a text, starting with the brief, starting with a concept, and then slowly iterating until it sort of like fit the bill, and then doing the rendering process. For a lot of the other drawings in the book, especially the stuff that was like spot colors or just more value driven, I would start with the way that I have typically done lots of my drawing art, where I would essentially like treat a section of my physical sketchbook, or just like a file in Photoshop, as like a sprite sheet, and I would basically just try and fill the space with a particular idea. Is it bioorganic robots? Is it drones? Is it a particular kind of melee weapon? And so basically just like cram every section of the page full of that stuff. And then like I've always found, and I think about this a lot, that one of my teachers in grad school would talk about, like when you start running out of ideas is when you start finally getting the new stuff, because it's like there's only so many ways you can draw a spacesuit, and there's only so many ways you can draw a laser gun, except that there are so many minute variations of what's possible that like when you get through like your surface, okay, everything I remember from like elementary school till yesterday, and then you start being like, oh crap, I'm running, like I don't know any more shapes for the butt of a gun or like the handle of a thing. And that's when you start researching stuff like, what does like a half musket, like I don't know what a musket is, I have no idea how it works. So like when you start hitting bedrock is when you start hitting Wikipedia. And like honestly, that's usually my favorite part of the process, where I'm like adding to that storehouse of knowledge of visual imagery, like because I've just run out of like the cheap signaling stuff from childhood.
Can I ask Chris, does that resonate with your experience? Because again, I'm very curious how y'all work as pros.
Yeah, I was about to say that hits the nail on the head for me as well. Especially working on Dance Macabre, it's like kind of going back to the I don't want to say false history, but kind of fantasy history that a lot of people engage in. We think about the Dragon game, we think about Tolkien, we think about all these things, and I think there's a baseline understanding of different weaponry, of different armors, of different, like you were saying, Ethan, architectural styles, things like that. But none of them quite like get really to what I'm looking for, which is like a lot of historicity within the 14th century specifically. And so, yeah, I spend a massive amount of time just doing research, looking at costuming guides, looking at different architectural motifs, looking at sculptures, carvings from the time, all that kind of stuff, just to try to actually get a sense of what the world felt and looked like at the time. And I think you're right. You can exhaust a certain storehouse of knowledge that you already have in the back of your head, but you do hit that bedrock, and you have to figure out a way to dig deeper. And I mean, thank God for the internet. I don't know. I don't know what I don't know what Gygax and those guys did back in the 70s. I mean, I guess they were just at the library all the time. But
yeah. I mean, growing up in the 90s, like we thought because we had Encarta and Eyewitness books, it was like a daunt. We can get. Are you kidding me? I could.
Encarta
with
was
just
a game
10
changer.
CD-ROMs, I could. Encarta was a game changer. Absolutely. But it is like now it's like, oh.
I was thinking this going back, like I listen mostly to rap, but I also listen sometimes to metal, and I was going backward in time, finding earlier like doom metal, like stuff I might like. Like today I listen to like Mastodon or Baroness, but like, in the 90s there's a band Sleep that put out a bunch of great music before the internet, like right before the internet. And looking at their album covers, like all the song names sound very Tolkien-esque. They sound very D&D, like metal names, but the art has like a lot of like weed kind of motifs, and like it feels very almost like the wrong genre.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about that actually. It was like, oh right, these guys are writing before the internet, so like the culture they're exposed to, like they're probably just working with a tattoo artist who can draw, and being like, yeah, what's around us? Like we're all smoking a ton of weed, so I don't know, like throw that in their skull. We like there's only so many like things you can use to represent sort of emotions when you're going for that representationality. It's easier almost to be very abstract. But when you're like, I feel like album art often has the same, follows the same rules, Ethan, that you've identified about TTRPGs, where they're like trying to do something very specific. Um, at least like metal, right? Like metal's often showing some specific scary badass thing, and it's like there's only so many scary badass things. At the end of the day, every single album is some version of a skull with a pot leaf with like a blood drop. You know, it's like there's only so many motifs.
Yeah, I mean
Anyway,
the album art for Sleep's Dope Smoker is it's Dune. It's essentially Dune. If you look at the album art for that, it's like dudes in still suits walking over a sand dune, and their still suits kind of look like they have bongs coming out of the mask.
Yeah, I think that
I like that.
I think
it's
it's
great.
Dune, but with weed. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's Dune with weed. It's the
Yeah.
perfect combination, really.
It's like, what is it, the Jon Stewart thing? It's like, have you ever walked that rhythm on weed? Like,
Exactly. So, so what are, I mean, I feel like, again, these are really just questions for y'all to talk to each other, but like, what are you working on? Like, Ethan, I know you're with the Sometimes Kingdom. That's a new game. It's more your game, and it's drawing on your lore, your stories that you and I are mechanicalizing together, you know, playing around with the system I've created, and what do we want to change about it for a more magical universe. What are some things you're drawing, and then maybe that can bridge into Chris and some of the stuff you're working on. And just, you know, I'm curious again, you know, how do artists work, and some, you know, differences or tips, or I don't know, anything that someone might find useful. Ethan, I think I might have said originally this was meant to be like car talk, but for RPGs. So like maybe some practical tips actually are appropriate. You've drawn hundreds and hundreds of RPG illustrations at this point. So
I think, and this is sort of, also drawing on like Chris, what you were talking about, like, while it is my favorite like aspect of like this process, or I guess just like, you know, doing studies of things, I guess if I'm giving advice about drawing in general, like absolutely draw from the things that you see, and from research, and from the objects around you. Like, it is very tricky to not get lost in the research phase. I have in the past with prior stuff. I mean, I've got pretty profound ADD, so it's something I'm always sort of wary of now. It's like, oh, like I'll just hyperfocus, and then like, great, now I know what balustrades are, and how, you know, like, you know, Gothic architectures. That isn't actually a sketch on a piece of paper. So it's that is something I have to constantly be mindful of. I've sort of been talking with my wife about stuff like that recently, about like, you know, because she's learning Spanish, so we both have like piles of flashcards as we're like doing our respective like nerdery. And I mean, for me, I've sort of stumbled on a way that I feel like it's a nice balance of those two. Like, if you're doing a study of something, like, definitely keep it to one idea per sketch. If you've got a sketchbook and you're working on something, or note cards, there's so many different ways of doing it. Like, I always feel weird about sketchbooks because I feel this real all-consuming need to fill it, which is ridiculous, because you're supposed to fill sketchbooks over as long, like, that's not the point of the sketchbook unless you're selling the sketchbook. The point of it is to have some paper that you can throw in your backpack easy. Like, so I guess that's the second thing. Don't feel the need, don't feel obligated to fill your sketchbook. Abandon a drawing if it isn't working out. Don't do a sunk cost thing unless you really, really like having a full sketchbook full of garbage, which has its own charm. Don't get me wrong. But definitely, if you're doing studies towards an idea, or you're trying to learn, for instance, architectural things, or weapons, or whatever have you, like, keep one idea per sketch, and then naturally your brain will shift gears, and you'll start drawing, you know, the outfit for a person. Like, it's this really wonderful, surprising moment where you didn't have to really push yourself or like climb that hill. Like, if you just are trying to acquire ideas and like shapes and forms and stuff like that, really just do like one sketch per idea at a time, and then like the more complex stuff will just start rolling out like when it's ready.
I mean, that's the same with writing. Like, Chris, I'm really eager to hear what you have to say, but like, it's the same idea with writing. You can get really lost in looking stuff up that then you don't do your own writing, and you're like, oh, that was a waste of 4 hours.
Great.
I know so much about some random thing that happened 500 years ago that doesn't matter.
No, Ethan, I also have pretty rageful ADD that I work very hard. I work very hard to keep it in check. But yeah, no, I get lost in the sauce all the time when it comes to the research phase, and that's also something that I have to constantly pull myself back from, which is like, okay, do the thing that we have set out to do. And you know, as a writer and as an illustrator, it definitely it applies to both. I mean, like, you know, I'm working on like a table right now of it's a D66 table of different items that you can find. And so last night I found myself at 1:45 in the morning, just like looking up legendary swords of medieval France and legendary items, and like who carried a censer, like who would have feasibly carried a censer that would smoke forever or something like that. You know, it's just like, yeah, and you're right. At the end of the day, you have to kind of like take a step back and be like, this is cool, this is fun, but also I just have to do the thing. I have to put something down on paper, even if it's abstract, even if it's a sketch.
Yeah, and I will say working with Wythe over the years has really helped impart that lesson. Like, you know, for as much as you're saying you're, you know, fall prey to that too, I feel like your ongoing philosophy of working, which is like, let's get something down on the page.
Yeah.
Like, as sort of like I've tried to, like, you know, by process of osmosis, like try and impart that to my own stuff. I will say also, if anybody is listening who is like on the younger side, do whatever you want, read until 1:00 in the morning, like draw something, don't draw something. It doesn't matter. You have infinity time. I'm mostly talking to other young professionals here. If you're like if you're up until like high school, literally just enjoy sitting up with that book that you stumbled on somewhere, or that article online, like,
which is fun, because it is fun. It's fun to do it. It's just a question.
So fun.
I think that's why one thesis we have with a podcast is like, if you're doing it professionally, what's different, and that's, and to your point, Ethan, I think it took me a decade of, I was working a day job and then at night would be lost in the sauce with various mechanical invention and lore writing and like map drawing. Because it was fun and I wasn't doing it and it wasn't until I was like, all right, if I'm going to sell this, then how valuable are these different tasks? And then it's not immediately obvious, but it becomes, right, it's a heuristic that's easier and easier as you do more and more. You're like, all right, I roughly know how long it takes to write that kind of thing. You roughly know how long it takes to draw different kinds of things. So it's easier for us to kind of have a factory approach where it's like, all right, we know we want to produce end product, but we've talked about also building in the loose creative time too, where you really just want to have time to just fuck around and find out, and that's important.
Yeah, play is important. It's an important part of creativity, whether you're writing or you're drawing or doing anything really. So it is. Yeah, I think it's good to point out that you should still have that even in a professional approach to the hobby or the industry or whatever we want to categorize it as.
Yeah, because ultimately it will save time. It's like that fucking around period of time will ultimately save you the time, because you're not jumping into, and I used to do this all the time, even as a young kid. Like, if you jump into a drawing and you have a certain standard that you're trying to like apply to it, like, and you haven't at least done like a couple of little sketches ahead of time, you're gonna like have a real sore like eraser hand or whatever. You're gonna be pressing the backwards action button a lot. Digital has changed it a lot, because you can go off on a tangent and be like, crap, well, let's just roll this back 70 steps and it's fine. But I mean, I think the difference professionally is it's like, oh man, that's actually time that I'm not going to be spending playing Zelda tonight, because I will be working. So it's like I think that like the difference professionally is like finding that balance of efficiencies while still making sure that like the process, because it's, I mean, obviously the big difference is it's a job. Like, you're doing it for money dollars, you're doing it to promote your career. So it's like there are, on one hand, there's more limitations on it, because it's like, oh, an audience has to purchase this. And then on the other hand, there's like even less limitations because you could technically work infinity hours on it. You could blow your writing arm out. You could like exhaust yourself, like,
Right.
and that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. So it's like trying to find efficiencies so that you live a healthy life while also, you know, making the donuts is the big challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think of it like other, like Chris, I don't know, because we were just watching a lot of great chefs do some very fast cooking over the last few days. And I think of it like that. It's like there is an end goal. Like people are paying to eat food, but you know, there's also an artistry, and at a certain level, like you have to manage time and all these ingredients and like people's expectations, but you also have to have fun and be creative and do it a little different every time, or else it's not, you know, or else it is fast food and it's not, you know, whatever haute cuisine of some kind. And that some of that is a mindset, and some of that is technique, and some of that is years of training, and some of that is you're getting paid enough to have your body be comfortable in space, and you have enough sleep, and you can actually like do it physically. So it's not sort of like, you know, you shouldn't beat yourself up if you don't feel you've reached that level. But I do think it is a mixture of setting rules about design in that most abstract sense of like design theory. So like when you're doing illustration, like you're saying, Ethan, like what kind of thing am I drawing? Maybe I do preliminary sketches of parts of it, or whatever you would do, the balletic movements, you know, in space before you do all the fine shading, or, you know, assign the contours exactly. And knowing how you're going to do it. We've talked about that before too, with like, are you drawing with a stylus on a pad, like a Wacom tablet, or are you drawing in a notebook or whatever? And I think writing is very similar. Yeah, you might, like, I outline everything for games now, and it's all sort of outline driven, and the outline can change, and I'll go back and change stuff. But it's having that approach of like, really, how long is this book supposed to be? Because one thing I learned is also people don't want to read 500 pages of lore necessarily. You can seduce them into that, but first they really want to know, like, what is this game about? How do I play it? Give me some tables for weird crap, you know. So
no time, planetfall.
yeah. Everyone wants to be fighting a xenomorph like 2 seconds into every adventure, and they want to know what to roll.
And you know what? I can't blame them. Can't blame them for it.
Yeah, no, of course.
So Ethan, you know, kind of moving into the Sometimes Kingdom, is that right? Yeah, moving into the Sometimes Kingdom. How do you think that your illustration practice, or any of the kind of experience, your drawing practice, has kind of informed the design of the game, or any of the elements within the game? I mean, I know y'all are using the grit system, but modifying it, kind of changing things around.
That's a really interesting question. I had a conversation a few months ago with a friend of mine who is part of the scenic union in Massachusetts, and you know, because I don't like do much theatrical stuff because I'm very, like, these days I'm very COVID safe because of like health reasons, and so it's sort of a bummer because like I don't even do like props work anymore. But I've been thinking a lot about, and this is a conversation that her and I had a lot about around this sort of idea, is that like theatricality isn't necessarily just like an artistic discipline. It's also, it's like there's a very particular kind of like, I don't want to say vibe. It's a certain kind of practice where they're like everything's kind of cranked up to 11, and it's like there's a certain artifice that you like apply to things. And I've been thinking about that a lot because I feel like that's a certain kind of, it is a very kind of puppet show sort of like mentality where it's like, I don't know, like there are tableaus and there are scenes, there are things that are happening, but like how exaggerated can it get before it just completely falls apart? Like, what is the sweet spot of exaggeration where it's like, that is like ridiculous as hell, but also I totally believe that those are people who like have interiorities. I feel like for me, that's sort of where I want to go with it. I think like for the quick start, like right now, it's really just trying to like adapt the art style that I've just sort of generally like developed for tabletop games over the past few years, and like essentially putting more greenery in it. But I can see the sort of direction of it going. I'm hoping that it will go in a direction of like sort of the work that I was doing right when I came to the city. For one thing, I feel like I'm going, and I know this is also just because of the awfulness of like AI and everybody sort of starting to reassess digital art a little bit. Like, I really miss drawing by hand, and I am going back to doing like sketchbooks and like starting drawings and scanning them a lot more, even if it takes a little bit more time. just because like I find the process like more satisfying, and I think there's this sort of like gritty energy. Like there's just something about the act of drawing something physically that kind of feels a little bit like a performance, and I kind of want to lend that to the drawings themselves and what the content is. So I'm hoping a little bit of that rubs off a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's interesting because I've been so focused on sci-fi, and I brought Ethan into TTRPGs via sci-fi. And Chris is something you and I've talked about a little bit before too, about like everyone likes all the genres, so it's not like one is good or bad. It's just like Ethan and I spent 4 years doing Stillfleet, and it was very sci-fi, and now it's like, all right, well, let's do the fantasy version. There's a couple ideas kicking around, but let's have at least a book that is set in Ethan's lore and world. And it's not like Tolkien-esque per se, but it's drawing on a few of the. I mean, magic is the big one, right? There's magic, and there isn't the same level of technology, although there's way more sort of industry. So I would almost say it's like a little bit science fantasy or like modern fantasy in that sense. But it's interesting going to that and back to the conversation about tropes and like what feels tired or whatever. It's like, all right, how are we going to approach our version of X? So there's a fighter class. Well, how is it different from every other game? How much do we want to change the rules versus how much does it show up in copy or lore or something versus, the art, for example, like, and the design, like how much can you communicate visually? Which is not something I think when I started Stillfleet, I was pretty naive about the possibilities. And like, I'd read all these books obsessively, but it's going back and reading them a new way. So like I'm always going back and looking through and just stuff I missed, filling in gaps of like this great game Rain that I'd never read or played from probably like 10 years ago. But just going through other games and being like, how are they communicating, the big ideas that work? And when does it feel flat or sort of, generic? And I don't know exactly how to translate that to illustration, but it's something I feel like Ethan, you and I talk about a lot. And I'm hoping that, Chris, you'll sort of, we'll basically all be in conversation as we hopefully keep doing this show, essentially. So yeah, I mean, with SK, so the status of that, we have a quick start coming out. Maybe can you give us a brief, what is the Sometimes Kingdom? Like, what are some things you're excited about of this rich world that you've been working on forever?
Sure. So I think that like, for me, like I enjoy fantasy. I think that there's a lot of rich material for it to be not necessarily like self-reflexive or self-conscious, but I mean you and I both like a pastiche, like this idea of there's so much material drawn from so many different sources, and having kind of a yes and mentality about like, well, of all the things that like one likes in a particular genre, what really would it look like if it all hangs together properly? A sort of magic word for me has always been like bricolage, this idea of like it's sort of beyond collage where the actual objects themselves start being incorporated into something. And I'm really trying to see what it looks like if there is kind of a bricolage fantasy where a fantasy world is made up of sort of like the scraps and remnants of other fantasy worlds. It's gone through like, your standard kind of trope of like, oh, there was a disaster in the past and things changed. But it's not quite utopian. It's more of this idea of like, time continues to go on. There isn't necessarily ultimate good and ultimate evil. So trying to bring in those kinds of like low fantasy ideas of like people just living in a place. That place happens to have this absolutely berserker, like high fantasy sort of origin. But in a lot of ways is like much more secular, I think, than other kinds of fantasies. So I would say I think what I'm hoping the Sometimes Kingdom will be is kind of like a bricolage secular fantasy about people living their lives in a place where magic is ridiculously overclocked.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It reminds me of what we were saying about medieval times and what's changed, what hasn't changed, because it feels like a setting where you have ridiculous magic, but it hasn't necessarily, like, it still feels D&D like. And I think there's something fun about that, in the same way that like as technology has increased, a lot of tensions have been heightened, to use social science language, but it hasn't, like, AI has not either ruined our world or made a utopia so far, right? It just seems like it's heightening existing
It's just
problems
another piece of complexity. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you could see magic in that same way. and Chris is back. Hey, Chris, we were just kind of talking about Ethan's game,
Hi.
or the game we're working on based on Ethan's writing, and just kind of the baseline ideas of a very magical place that still feels secular, like it feels like a modern place where there's just tons of magic and people adapt. And so, for example, you die, you become a skeleton. Skeletons are there. Everyone knows skeletons, very normal. And what would that sort of feel like? Which, yeah, maybe Spire has shades of that as well. Okay, whales are how you get around. Sky whales, totes norm. It doesn't feel magical the way the Dragon game, in a fun way I find more for younger kids, but like highlights certain things as like in the way Loader did, right? Like beyond those hills, there's one dragon. And I think that's one way to do magic and fantasy and to play with these tropes. But Ethan, goes in a different direction. So that's kind of recap.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Chris?
Yeah.
Very nice. I was gonna say, if my audio is working now. Yes. Okay. So what you were saying reminds me of a couple of games. One being Spire, which has great tonality, feels dark, feels oppressive, but at the same time, has sky whales, has these kind of fantastic elements that make it seem like there can be something beyond that kind of oppression. And that's something that really comes through in the illustration style. Another one that I'm thinking of is the Ultraviolet Grasslands, UVG, Ultraviolet Grasslands, which has this very like Mobius feel to it. These kind of like flat pastels, but the way in which the illustration communicates this openness, this kind of unending prairie that you can explore through the mechanics of the game, just syncs really nicely together.
Yeah, and Vaults of Varn, which is also in that 70s mode. So I think there's a whole OSR world where magic is around, but it's not Tolkien-esque. I think people have kind of agreed on that almost as a design community, and then it's almost there's just many different shades of sort of what does that mean or what does that look like. And I think one of the interesting things is maybe Chris, you and I are very obsessed with all those games, and I feel like someone like Ethan is extremely smart and reads a lot, but does not read all those games. It's just like that like I feel like Ethan, you have stepped into this community from adjacent video game theater, fine art.
Yeah, it's like I am going from like I'm at that period of going from being a guest into this world to being like, oh yeah, this is what I want to spend my free time doing. Huh, cool. All right, so I got a lot of reading to do. And it's like we try and keep like a good library of this stuff, and I think that part of it is like there's just so much of it. It's been happening for 40, 50 years at this point. It's a whole new genre, and like I was there a little bit in the 90s for like 3rd edition for like a very, very brief period, and then I stopped for like 20 something years. So it's like I'm partly playing catch up, and like I'm fighting myself like going from ambassador to be like, yep, I'm becoming a citizen of this, and I don't know if that's going to involve like finding one system that I'll be obsessed with, or if it's like the breadth and depth of it, I'm going to just start getting interested in the all walks of this. So like I definitely read less of this, but like I'm seeing myself look at the games library a little bit and we'll see what happens.
And I think that'll be fun to see what products like, because there's also a difference I think when you go from hobby to business with a thing on your computer and like some files in a folder to like you selling a physical book. And that absolutely provides all kinds of like that turn is really interesting when you're like, oh, well, actually we could do this very differently. We can do we could do deluxe versions. You could do mini versions. It's like, there's so many options. And that again is a whole design space to explore that if you haven't been making physical books, it's just another thing to like get lost in.
As both a designer and a customer, I am such a sucker for that shit. Like, get like, oh yeah, I want that cover with that. Are you kidding? It comes with a little bookend in it. What? I want it.
You got to get the ribbon. Gotta get the ribbon.
Gotta get the ribbon. Gotta get the
I know.
I'm anti-ribbon. Everybody else likes ribbon.
You're anti-ribbon? Wow. No. Just kidding.
We've discussed this. It's
it's a whole thing.
Ethan can do ribbons for the products for which he's lead designer, but for
very fair, very fair, very judicious.
As long as there's a paragraph at the beginning of you being like, I am writing off this ribbon.
You'll notice there's a ribbon attached to the spine of
I
this
do
book.
not agree with this ribbon.
I find it annoying. I'm going to cut mine off.
It's perforated,
really
so
love
you have the option
Yeah.
of just tearing the ribbon out.
Ripping it out.
Yeah.
Ethan, I remember Wythe was telling me a bit about the Sometimes Kingdom, and I mean, I think it sounds fantastic. One thing from a design perspective, and talking about physical books as well, Wythe had mentioned that you were planning on releasing it as a series of A5 books. Is that something that you're still doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the plan as it stands is I personally just coming again like just 90s like coming from zine stuff, like I find the A5 format to be very charming. And coming from like just a straight up cognitive load perspective, I find that like absorbing information for me personally with a smaller piece of paper is just faster. And from a design perspective, like it's an interesting challenge to make something look really great on the page, and then there is a page break, and then there's like another sequence. Like it organizes information differently, not that much differently. It's like same but different. But I still really like the idea of doing it. The sort of main conceit of the Sometimes Kingdom is that there's this world called Seasons Keep, which has been around for a long time. It's the classic sort of like secret fantasy world, you know, right behind the magic door. And it's divided up sort of roughly into like where the seasons are places. So there's different islands. There's the winter island of Interheart, and there's the spring island of Springside, and the summer island of Summerside, and the autumn island of Copia. But like, and the magic system is very ecology and like territory based. So the schools of magic all sort of roughly line up with it as well. But there's this idea of maybe that isn't actually how magic is organized, and so there's all these untoward effects that happen. So if you're doing winter magic, there's this blood price. If you're doing summer magic, there's going to be like, you know, all of these like bizarre outcomes that'll happen because it's very easy to overclock it. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the names of the schools actually harken back to like what the islands were named before they became Seasons Keep. So it's this idea of like there is this magical system that might have been grafted onto like the way that the world was before, because this is how the world is now. And I think that that's really interesting, where information like doesn't really fit the thing that it's symbolizing. And in a magic world where like knowledge is literally power, like what does that mean? Like the thing that is symbolized can be the symbol, like, because it's magic. So that is a really interesting and kind of dangerous idea about like what is information in a world like that. Blah blah blah. But like I really want to like I think have each of the seasons be released as their individual A5. Like I'm sure eventually things will be compiled and we might do like a larger book at some point, etc. But just having it more like a digest where it's something that you can like collect, and each one like will hopefully be easy to read and like have a like chain of design like that links them all together. But like there can also like there can be variations, there can be differences to try and get at that like game feel of like, oh, these islands are very different from each other, and those magic systems that they have might be different even at the design level a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's the hope. We're sort of still figuring it out, but
Nice. Yeah, I think that having each island confined to its own A5 book does a good job of communicating that, where it's same but different, like you're saying. It's separate but connected at the same time. And Wythe, it's funny that you brought up Vaults of Varn earlier, Ethan. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's like a science fantasy. Mm-hmm. I guess I don't know. Would you describe it as like a post-apocalyptic game? I haven't actually played it, but I own.
I would say it's very similar to Ultraviolet Grasslands.
Yeah,
they're both OSR clones. You know, they're like and Electrum Archive. I think those three jump out to me as the premier. Like the way that Cairn and Knave and Into the Odd are like generic. I guess those games, Electric Bastionland, are less generic. They're like it's still basically just D&D, but it's all tables of weird crap. But yeah, it's like a desert kind of with some big cities that they have water, and that's the main sort of resource. But the drawing and the writing is very like 70s, like science fantasy vibes, similar to I think UVG, but different. They're two different specific creators who I believe write and draw it all. I could look that up and confirm. Love to talk to those guys. personally love their work.
Yeah, I think Ultraviolet. Well, I don't think that Luka Rajic does the illustrations for that, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I don't think that he does. But Vaults of Varn is also released as a series of A5 zines, right? So it's kind of the same thing where there's this like iterative publishing that happens.
No, Luka Rajic does do the art.
Oh, he does. Okay, good to know. Very cool.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I think this series, I think with SK, because I liked with Stillfleet, you get all the rules in one book, and it's a kind of bigger book, but then you have all the rules, and you have all the lore, and you kind of just could play with that book. And then other supplements are like adventures, they're adding, worlds. But I think for the idea of Sometimes Kingdom would be some version of, I mean, and the grid system eventually will just give away kind of all the rules, and then you could play the games, and it's more like you're getting specific. Like there's another OSR mini book called Ruiner that's quite nice and short, and it would be interesting if each setting was just a 1 A5 short thing with like tables, illustration, lore, and then you could go around these islands, and you could bundle them as a nice like package, which I think as a product is really 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 different, but really really cool. Compared to one huge letter size like omnibus rulebook, which again I don't think it's like good or bad. It's like these are just different ways to approach like design and information. Yeah, what do you put on each page? So
Yeah.
I think it'll be cool to keep it fresh for us by like doing new stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so too. This is also bringing to mind for me Dolmenwood, which is on Kickstarter right now, which originally started as a series of modules of adventures for OSE and other, like BX clone kind of games. But I think they've created their own system or clone of it. And the way that they're releasing the Kickstarter version, at least, is that you have kind of like a thin basic rule book that lays out all of your mechanics. And then you have a settings book and then I believe a monsters book. And the setting book is the larger of the three and kind of lays out the more detailed setting that you have. But that being said, yeah, as a product and as a consumer, that's something that I definitely want to buy. It really speaks to me. And I could see that working for Sometimes Kingdom as well, where it's like, yeah, you can buy them individually, you can buy them as a bundle, all these different ways of going about it. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I think one thing that like like internally, like on design team for Stillfleet, the thing that we all sort of like really geek out about is playing around with diegesis and the idea of design being like internal to the world versus like what is necessary to have a pleasant experience reading and like absorbing the game. And I think that like a nice thing about fantasy, especially if it is like more modern fantasy, is that like I think part of the reason people are drawn to those ideas of like modern fantasy is that there's so much ephemera which isn't used anymore. Some of which we grew up with, some of which predates us by years, decades, centuries. Everything from ex libris's to like commonplace books to like design tables to like all of that stuff it's such a fabulous way of encoding information, and there's so many different varieties of it, and it's so fun to have it and experience it. So I feel like that's the kind of thing that like on a longer timetable gets me really excited about doing something like fantasy, where there's this opportunity to, it's like, oh well, if this is going to be like a charming world full of charming magic, some of which is terrifying, some of which is cute, some of which is like bloodthirsty and scary, and some of which is like just a cozy autumn afternoon foraging for mushrooms or whatever. Like the breadth with which like different design elements can be brought to bear on that has like such a long pedigree and timetable that like you can just draw from like all of these different centuries to do it. And I think that that's a really cool sort of like envelope for a form factor that you really can't get from other genres.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of illuminated manuscripts and codexes recently, thinking about the layout of those books and also thinking about the labor that went into it, which was insane at the time, 13th, 14th century, doing everything by hand. But there is an interesting way in which they communicate information, which is very terse but long form at the same time. And I've been thinking a lot about how I can incorporate that into my game, into Dance Macabre, at least for like frontispiece kind of things, as a way of introducing the historicity, but also getting just, again, the kind of like vibe or the feeling of being in that time and space.
Yeah, historicity is such a great word. It's like, you can't prove it didn't happen. And like, I mean, that's what really drew me to medieval source text in the first place during college. Aside from the fact that I had a friend who was really deep into Arthuriana, and it was something that we could just like talk about. Like beyond that, it's like the source material itself is also like apocryphal and inaccurate.
Yes.
It's like Geoffrey of Monmouth didn't know what he was talking about, and it's so great. It's like, oh, that is a foundational text of this. Wow, there's a lot of giants in this. I'm into this.
And they were real.
They were real. Yeah, fake history all the way down is really great.
No, I was going to say I like that at the level of mechanics too, where you can sort of say, this is how we do this thing, and then you can have like another level, which we do all the time in our games, like, oh, but if you could also do it this other way we thought of, and they both work, and these are the effects. They're kind of branching pathways where, as opposed to rule books where it's like the feeling of correctness and am I doing it right, and really militating against that. I just want to shout out again that game Rain that I was reading. I think Greg Stoltzer, I think the guy did Unknown Armies, has a great sense of that, where there's a lot of rules where it's like, or we also tried it this way and this is pretty fun. And there's kind of lengthy explanations of like the probabilities, which like I don't get too into the math myself, but I appreciate that someone was really laying out the world, almost like annotations to someone else's work, even though it's the same author just revisiting it and being like, this thing that's not even true.
Yeah, it's like the Royal Tannenbaums. This presupposes, what if it didn't?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, what were you going to say? It sounded like you were about to.
Oh, I was just going to say, going back to the historicity thing, we were talking about that with bestiaries just this past weekend. I don't know if you remember, we were talking to Penny, our 12-year-old friend, about bestiaries and like the origins of owlbears and things like that. But just like where it's like, yeah, these are like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th hand accounts that are translations into the French from the Latin, from the Arabic, from the Greek, from the Persian, and there's just this like morphing of history through that time period, which fantasy does do a really beautiful job of kind of encapsulating, for better or worse, whether it's Tolkien-esque or something different. But mechanically speaking, I do think that there is a tendency in the OSR to be like, these are the rules, but if you don't like it at the table, just kind of make up your own thing. Do whatever you want here, which I really like and appreciate.
Yeah, and I think the feeling in some games that, to me, that was a gripe I had with D&D as a kid, is like, it's like, wait, are there no historians in this world? Like, can't I just look up, like, why is everything new? Why is everything buried in secret?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the OSR, like Vaults of Varn, which I've more recently like read, does a good job of kind of explaining that diegetically? Like, well, no one's really sure of anything because it's a sort of a post-apocalypse, which feels more like the Gene Wolfe books. It feels sort of like, okay, that like the magic could all actually be, nanotechnology or something. Who knows?
Yeah.
Like, we've lost the word for it, so it's all just magic now. Numenera kind of gets at that, but again, it's very loosey-goosey with kind of like billions of years have passed and was nothing recorded. Like, how do we have sort of no record, but we still have these technologies? But yeah, I think the original games, one reason they do feel tired when I look at like actual D&D products, not to like bash them. It's just, they don't have a sense of historicity in either direction. It's either, it doesn't feel lost enough, and it also doesn't feel like a real world where people could have the job of like writing books about, the Red Wizards of Thay or whatever, and I think there's something interesting in USR where it's taking seriously some of that gimmick of like playing with time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of the idea of in-world historians, over the past month, I've been playing the crap out of Tears of the Kingdom, which feels very validating to a certain extent, because like what I want to have happen with the Sometimes Kingdom is exactly that. Like, there are surveyors and cartographers and historians who are desperately trying to uncover what the hell happened like over the past couple of thousand years, because there was so much damage. It's like, so it's a job, it's a vocation, and magic is like, well, it just works, so we're going to use it. But really, we don't know what's going on with it. that seems kind of alarming, but there isn't any time to like really figure it out. In no way is this going to blow up in all of our faces in a couple of ventures, you know. But like in Tears of the Kingdom, like there are actual cartographic survey teams going around like researching the floating ruins. Your job is to go do like geoglyph surveys, which is like the nerdiest thing to happen in a mainstream video game in so long, and it's so wonderful. But it's like the culture inside the game is so well thought out. Like you were constantly running into people who are exploring the ruins for, you know, for themselves, for trying to like seize control, or because they're working for the castle and are altruistic. It feels like, yeah, what an amazingly wondrous world. It's our day job to go try and figure out what the hell's going on. It's your job to go fight the villain,
but also figure out what's going on at the same time. Yeah. No, that's so. Yeah, that's also something I really loved about Tears of the Kingdom as well. And I don't know, you could go off on a whole thing about like the history of Zelda and all of that, but no, it does a great job of making you feel like you're living after a catastrophe, after a calamity, even if you want to go back to Breath of the Wild.
I see what you did there.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's funny too, like a lot of this stuff was also source material, like appendix in source material for some of the original Dragon game. I mean, you know, like Jack Vance Dying Earth stuff was a huge influence on early D&D, but somewhere in the mix that sense of, like you're saying, lost history got lost in and of itself. And I don't know when that happened or where that happened. I'd be interested to do some research into that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it might be that the early games were focused more on simulation and combat and exploration, to be generous, and sort of the dungeon crawl and hex crawl as two modes of sort of not just doing combat, but they weren't focused on the social situations where that stuff would really matter. So you could, like, you know, it could be compressed to like, okay, you meet the old wizard who has an archive of this area, but you didn't need to improv that stuff, and it wasn't interesting, and no one was focused on those skills. Whereas now, in the modern theater of the mind, narrative focused games, like that's, you know, the foreground and background have been inverted, and that's the fun stuff that we like do ourselves. We like teach to new GMs and players, and then you have to write down the prompts for like, okay, how does that work? Because the goal is never actually to memorize whole science fiction books or fantasy books of lore. It to be able to have fun sort of moments where that stuff matters and play in some way, and really just to spam the world, to use, you know, D. Vincent Baker's term from Apocalypse World, spam the world constantly, whatever vibe you want. So, you know, partly it's about, I think D&D does spam the world, but in a video game like way where it feels ahistorical. It's a flat timeline. So it's interesting because there's interesting stuff around you all the time that's mentioned that you can go kill and rob, but there's not like a world with a history where like stuff happens and there's not that sort of connection into the future either. It also loses the sense of futurity. You know, you don't get a sense that anyone is like changing over time in those early books. And I think I'm most interested in games that do play with time. I also think, Chris, that's one reason I do like your game, is it's so different from like Stillfleet or Far Future, whatever, you know, the politics of technology and labor, but it's still like essentially a game about, you know, history. Something big happens, and then, okay, we have to build a new world, and what is that going to look like? There's a number of actually modern horror games that do that. You know, I think Red Markets and Rotted Capes are both just like interesting, you know, what ifs that mechanicalize some of that stuff. So, you know, it's not reinventing the wheel. I just think it's a shift. Maybe this would be something to talk about with older game designers, but like, has there been a shift in the industry away from kind of doing what video games do best and toward some other form of narrative structure? And how do we even like think about that stuff? So that's a long-winded way of agreeing with you. But.
No, I like it. I mean, it reminds me of like, I want to say early 20th century, the relationship between photography and painting, where you start to see more and more of a movement away from representational or naturalistic painting more into abstraction with the rise of photography, because we have the technology now to represent a moment in time. It takes way less time. It's functionally and economically more feasible. And so it allows you to kind of like go into abstraction a bit. And so I actually wonder if the fact that we're at a point with video games where they do what they do very well, which is simulate combat, bring you that kind of level of excitement, if that's why we're having this shift in TTRPG design that brings us back into the historical, or brings us back into more of like a lore heavy, more character heavy driven kind of writing style.
Yeah. That's interesting. The same thing happened in theater with the invention of cinema. Like like absolutely lavishly gorpy, like, traveling theatrical shows. Like theater had a chance to be stripped down too after cinema, because there was, that tension of like, oh, we could do even more, we could do even less. We don't know. Maybe they're both the same thing or not. But then having theater become more abstract to a certain extent, less reliant on like massive like set and showpieces. Don't get me wrong, I love a massive theatrical set and showpiece. I just want it all. Like I want the conceptual, and I want the giant puppet gorilla.
Well, and sometimes it's teaching the audience too. So like, I mean, that's where you get these interesting with modernism. You get Beckett and Brecht, right? And so you have plays which are right before you have Chekhov, whatever. You have like the height of like modern theater where it's stripped down, but it's very realistic and the emotions are realistic. And even though it's stripped down, it's like a table and two old people arguing. You don't need to teach the audience. Like they get in there and they're like, okay, I get it. Whereas when you move to Beckett, it's like, wait, it's a homeless guy in a trash can, like ranting about like slowly decaying for 3 hours. And it requires more of a leap of faith. It requires almost new tools to enjoy it and really kind of zone out. Maybe edible helped if those had existed in the jazz age. But I think more about Brecht now. Obviously, he's like a political artist, and it's like I think there's something to that with TTRPGs too, where the audience is going to know how to kill some goblins and grab their gold. And they now, I think, more and more, especially younger players, want theater of the mind that's narrative rich. But there's lots of other things you could do too. War games have a resurgence also. I don't participate in it, but like tabletop war games are huge.
Yeah.
And then what we're doing, where it's like really about, political economy and like what can you do with that, and how can you kind of explore politics through games? And again, drawing parallels with Spire and other games that do this. I even back to like Apocalypse World again, like how do you recreate communities in a non-utopian silly way, but in a way that's interesting to other adults in that RPG environment. I think most people are going to get it because you can give them handholds from slaying goblins, but it's really not about slaying goblins. So there's some sleight of hand with like getting people into the theater in this metaphor, to see the show. And then bam, Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Whatever.
In terms of, that's interesting. Like in terms of illustration for these, I feel like there's an interesting tension point. Because, with that idea that like things can become more stripped down and more theater of the mind. There is still this impetus for illustration to do this work of like, it has to be handsome and sumptuous, like, because it is the one bit of hand holding of like, here's like, now you get a vibe, you get an actual like moment in time. Like you're seeing people doing the thing in a place. And like, I on one hand don't want to abandon that because that's such a rich like area for artistry. And at the same time, like stripping that down just to the diagrammatic doesn't feel satisfying either. It's like, I think that there's this point for some interesting play and tension between the idea and the like sort of like, it's not really neuroscience, but like the left braininess of something, versus like the full rendered Wizards of the Coast, Magic the Gathering, like painterly card that took 70 hours to draw. Like, I feel like there is so much play and there's such a rich history of illustration of like trying to find different ways of interpreting and showing like what's happening, while also like doing a little hand holding, but not necessarily just being that same painterly effect every single time.
Right.
Yeah. Are there particular illustrators or painters or anything really that has influenced the work that you've done for Stillfleet and now that you're working on for Sometimes Kingdom?
Yeah, unfortunately, my memory does not work in a way that I could say them off the top of my head, but I will definitely furnish a list. To answer your question, yes.
Yes.
if we could beg you to do some homework, that would be cool to have a list.
I would be
post
happy to do
in
some homework and
the
the
show
next time
notes.
I'm on. Or yeah, totally. Honestly, I've got a very long laundry list. And I
Nice.
feel like everybody should know about these illustrators. Some of them are historical, lots of them are contemporary, and I want people to go buy their shit. So
Very cool. Yeah, we'll put that in the show
Yeah.
notes for sure. Well, I guess too, a part of what I was asking with that question as well is like how often are you looking at the illustrations of other RPGs versus anything else really, like whether it's classical painting, whether it's movie poster art, anything like that.
I would say I am more rarely looking at. I feel like at the beginning of the project is when I start, like I do this really big push of and I'm trying to do more now that we've got like such a large library of game stuff to peruse, and there's every month there's more and more game stores, like even in the city. It's something that I want to start learning more about. I would say at the beginning of a game project, I wind up absorbing a lot or like studying like the work from other game like books, just to sort of see what the lay of the land has been in quotes historically, which is, past 50 years or whatever, and then also contemporaneously. I would say most of the time I am looking at art that is outside of the game space, mostly because I'm always trying to sort of see stuff fresh, and like sort of try and pull things in from the media landscape like that aren't necessarily in games.
Right. Yeah, and I find it, Chris, I don't know what your habits are. I mean, I consume so many of these games almost exclusively as PDFs. I did buy a bunch of stuff at Gen Con because it was there. But I'm a big e-reader for a number of reasons, mostly money, also environmental, and also like so much stuff is interesting for one page out of 100. No offense to but it's like I don't really need it around ever. But it's great to have a PDF and be able to look at it. But it's almost like at least with writing and design, after it becomes a wash, and to what Ethan's saying, like it can be interesting to like I realize that most of my inspirations aren't really from other game designers as such. They're from actual science and other forms of art and um and science fiction. And really, I mean, mostly these days like just political news, political podcasts. Like that's most of like 90% of what I spend my time consuming, like for by choice. So it makes sense, Ethan, that you're looking at stuff or playing video games or whatever that's not about TTRPGs. But then when you go to do TTRPGs, your brain is loaded with that. Like you've already done a lot of heuristic, like you've refined stuff for some reason in your brain the way you want it, and then bam, you apply that.
Yeah, I would say
Comfortable.
if there's one sort of bridge between those two that I'm always thinking about, and it's like it's so funny because I feel like artistically it's the thing that goes all the way back to like my earliest memories of like picking up a crayon or whatever. Like I love items. I love the idea of items. I love the envelope of what an item is, what an item isn't. I have like the only reason I know anything about tabletop games before starting to work on Stillfleet, aside from playing a little bit of tracking game in the late '90s, was like reading ancillary media, bestiaries, and things on the search for pictures of more items. I really like. There's something about, because an item is an object, but it's not just an object. It's got like an item is such a weird name, and like it has like, depending on like what kind of like legal or like historical framework, it actually has like real, like it has real world importance in terms of like law and trade and all these things. But in games specifically, it has this very specific meaning, and I just love them so much. So that's something that like I will always be looking at, and always be looking at other games, because I constantly run out of like, oh man, I've seen all the items. I need to find out more items. I need to see more items. So I got to go look at books that are games so that I can see the game items.
Yeah, I feel you on that. I do the same thing. I'm usually less interested in character illustrations in RPG books specifically. I mean, like character illustrations are great. I love it. I love seeing people do the thing, but I always want to see the stuff. And there's such a funny, like, I don't know, from a Marxist perspective, it's so funny. Like there's this extra value that's added to a thing in a game. It's like extra use value, outside of just like its use or its trade value. So I don't know if that makes it like a trialectic or something like that. But yeah, there is this extra weight that is infused into items, especially when you're thinking about tabletop role playing games or video games or anything like that. Really, any
Yeah.
similar media. That yeah, there's a deep appeal to that I also lavish in probably more than I should sometimes.
Yeah, there's something fun like games like Minecraft really break it down to its elements and with like crafting and raw, the alchemy of some raw material being transformed into utility. But I actually think with TTRPGs, you often see the opposite in a fun way now. With I'm thinking of like Songbirds, or like some the body tables in Gradient Descent, where you're finding it's like your character could be equipped with like a big spoon, and it's almost like the opposite of like gaining utility as you go. It's like there's something that being lost, and I think it's because of postmodernity. It's because of the great acceleration. We live awash with items. Everything, like, is this pen an item that should, right, it's not just like it has a dollar value, but it has a special, like, it's filling an equipment spot on Wythe Marshall's like body. And that gives it this like real kind of it becomes fetishized, right? It has this extra sheen, this extra but I think with the OSR you have more games that are like fucking with that. And I think that's a lot of fun from a writing perspective. And Ethan, I take it from a drawing perspective. Like when we did the cards of like, yeah, we'll put a bunch of useful architect. So our games.
This is I mean I love how the role that architect plays in Stillfleet, because it's like this could it's on, the onus is on the player to find a use for this. It is 100 million years of infinite garbage. And some of it is being traded because it, like, either somebody who has got like untoward feelings or motives, like, wants you to get it, no reason, just please bring this back to the company, just can we have it, like, we're gonna take it, we'll give you a small amount of money for it, we're not gonna do anything with it, don't worry about it. Versus like, oh, it's legitimately actually garbage.
And they don't know the indeterminacy is both at the level of utility for the character, but also the evil company or anyone the in another game, like just the merchant buying it. It's like it's kind of a determinant whether that thing, there's so much stuff in our world. And I think these games, unlike real, so this I guess could distinguish games this way. Real medievalist game, there'd be very few items. It'd be like your items are like stick, mud, like it's really hard to get useful stuff. But most of the games, like the Dragon game and all the games I've created, they're full of items, they're awash with items, they're fun. But that doesn't reflect some reality. Like that reflects us, right? That's a comment on us in 2023.
Yeah, and something that's been on my mind a lot doing Sometimes Kingdom is like, what is the difference between a magical and a non-magical item? Like at the level of the rules, and a non-magical item is an item that doesn't have like spell mechanics attached to it. But like beyond that, like, okay, well, world building wise, how do they perceive the difference between them? Is everything saturated with magic? No. Like, what makes something special then? Like, if everything like potentially has a spell or a curse on it, like, how do they exchange goods? What is the, like, how do they feel about objects in space? And so like that's the stuff that I can never stop thinking about. Like, I think that like a lot of the media that we consumed growing up, didn't, I mean, obviously it's like it's fun entertainment for children that's been done by like a commercial company after Reagan like rolled back a bunch of like protection laws, so you can make toy shows. So it's like that level of care I can't really say was imbued most of the time. But like if you're a kid and you like reading and you're watching this stuff and like outside of like literature, it's like I can't stop thinking about like, well, that video game said that one thing. Like, what like, like, or there's like an offhand comment in like a really dumb show for like 6-year-olds, and it's just like I've spent 30 years being like, what did they mean by that? Like, what are the ramifications of a world where that's true?
Oh man.
And so now there's like this chance to like really drill in and get that, like, oh yeah, the seasons are places, magic is real. Like, oh god, what are their trading laws like? Who cares? I care. Presumably the players playing this game will hopefully care too. It's a very particular kind of nerd. And it's like, and it makes me very happy that there's more than 3 people out there who are interested in that level of like reality.
Yeah.
Because that's about learning about life on Earth, which is complicated and weird and annoying. But like has that level of specificity for everything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot, for fantasy and medievalism and stuff like that. Thinking a lot about political economy in a medieval period where it's like, in my game, money is actual money is very rare. You don't find deniers, silver pennies, basically, denarius, whatever you want to call them. You don't find them that often because it's just not, it's around, but it's not really accessible to most people. And so there's a big emphasis on actually trading for goods of an equivalent value instead of, using gold pieces to buy items and things like that. So, like, I don't know, it's a way of trying to think about the value of an item while keeping things feeling historically somewhat accurate. But there's a level of translation that has to happen there that can be a little bit complicated.
Yeah, the history of money is so interesting, and also with the acquisition of relics, and I love accumulating treasure in any game just because it's a fun brain squirt. But like trying to create like an economy or like those sort of mechanics in a game that is non-colonialist is
Right.
it's honestly it's not it's a challenge in the sense that it's exciting to try and put something in place. Like it is the fantasy of a fantasy world where it's like, oh great, you just harrowed that tomb and you found all that treasure. Like, did you ask the necropolis if it was theirs originally? Like the skeletons who you've been fighting, like actually unalive there. Like, or there is there's a chamber of commerce you have to turn treasure into. Like, hey, congratulations, we're going to give you some money for what you found, but that literally belongs to us because we've been living here for like 3,000 years. So thanks for the good works. If you don't, you're going to be hounded by the authorities for a very long time. So yeah, it's stuff like that like I always get like kind of squigged out when like players of these games with long standing are just like, that's too much work, or that's too dumb. That's like not the things. It's like, no, this is more interesting. Like,
yeah, exactly. That's always been my point, is like, if you do it right, if you find the right narrative structure, these themes are clearly more interesting than just going and bashing goblins in the face, because that just, it just puts, to me, like that stuff puts you to sleep after 5 minutes as an adult. You know what I mean? Like, I just think video games do it so much better. Also, I think that debate, it just feels over. And I think it's really interesting all the ways, because there's more than one way. And I think Stillfleet is a very specific way in the way that Spire is. And to, in terms of less specific ways, those are both generally in the idea of, subversion and complicity. But then there's all these other ways. So I think Ethan's game gets it almost like, it's almost like a childlike thing of like, well, what if there was no colonialism? Like, there's this magical place where that just never happened per se, because of maybe magic. And so it's not that no one has any problems. It's just that power structures aren't the same. They're not mirroring the real world in that way. So it's not exploring that in the way that Stillfleet's exploring, life in 2023, and we're setting it for our future so that we have some, parody, space. But another game that our editor, our longtime collaborator, Stephen Aubrey, our friend, is working on is about, what if you're in historical Western Europe? So that's another conversation we should have, Chris. But the Dukes of Burgundy want to do it differently. And like, could Europe have gone down any other path? Is there any way where to have a state that isn't evil emerge out of that world? And I don't know. It's very incipient, but it's an interesting provocation about like a historical game. There's no magic, that tries to specifically explore those what ifs. And is there any way to do it that doesn't just sort of come to the conclusion, nope, they were all just, horrible, or like, I don't know, what does it take? Like, we haven't, it's just, anyway, so it's your game again, also, I think is sort of, it's like the zombie apocalypse thing, right? The zombie apocalypse happens and that gets rid of some of the tensions within capitalism because, well, there's zombies everywhere. So
yeah,
you got stuff to worry about.
You got bigger problems on your plate. And I mean, that's actually, I was talking to Steven this past weekend about why Dance Macabre is set where and when it's set. And for me, something that Barbara Tuchman, it's in the 14th century, right? And something that Barbara Tuchman talks about a lot in her book, A Distant Mirror, which is a fantastic history book. I've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again because I love it. But something that she talks about a lot is that by the middle of the 14th century, you begin to see the kind of like sprouts of modernity. You see the sprouts of capitalism starting to form, individual thought, individual philosophy, things like that, especially after the Black Plague ran through Europe, you start having, like the jacqueries, the labor uprisings in cities, and all this kind of stuff. And so it is interesting to be like, okay, well, what if we hit pause on that process in that moment and just threw everything out of the window? What would the world end up looking like from there? Which, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in talking to Stephen more about that as well, for sure.
Yeah, and I think all these games, there's that aspect. There's also like, I want to draw cool stuff, or I want to make a bunch of items, or I want to write a bunch of mutations. Or, so it's like it's also in conversation with those other urges and market realities of like what could be interesting as a book that people would actually play. What do playtesters like? But it's just as one thing that I think now we can articulate. And obviously with this podcast, we can spend a bunch of time on. Speaking of time. It's like 4:30. Ethan, do you want to? Is there stuff that we should talk about that we've not brought up?
That's a very interesting question. I have not a thought in my head. So if there's any if there's any excellent questions, I'm happy to answer it.
Or like Chris, I mean, same question to you, but I'm just curious about. Yeah, I mean, illustration was one of the primary reasons we brought you on, even though it's an audio format, so you can imagine Ethan's art.
Imagine in the theater of the mind, it's the best drawing you've ever seen, and I, Ethan Gould, did it.
Yeah, could you do some ASMR explanation of one of your favorite illustrations for us? Can you just audibly?
Yeah. So you're looking at a bipedal robot. It's rendered in graphite. It's got spindly legs, but not so spindly that it's off-putting, more like what a jaunty little creature that is. And it has tubes coming out of it, because tubes are what make the things move.
This is great.
And see. And then, 4 hours later.
Wow.
You could do a whole podcast of just that.
Yeah, that's compelling.
Honestly, it would give my wrist a break, so that sounds great.
That's fantastic.
It's time for non-drawing theater.
Well, should we let Ethan go? And Ethan, we'll have to have you back on, especially as the Sometime Kingdom develops, which I know you and I should we'll meet about on Thursday. And yeah, it's really just interesting. I just wanted to sort of bring everyone in the same room because Ethan, you and I speak about this stuff so much, and now Chris and I have also been, just wandering across this whole world of RPGs. And like, wherefore? So yeah, thanks a lot for making so much time, and yeah, we'll have to link to things you want people to see. Obviously, Stillfleet I can cover, but please let us know,
additional projects as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. This was a hoot.
Where can people find you?
People can find me at Spectral House on all social media.
Nice, easy,
cool. So Ethan Gouldini at Spectral House, amazing artist in general, and has been specifically illustrating and co-authoring some TTRPGs with me, and in the near future, I'm sure we will all be working together. Chris, any final thoughts for this one?
No, I'm also thoughtless after this very good conversation.
Just bereft of words.
Just
to final thought, and this is a whole other 3-hour conversation. If you're listening to this, and you like drawing and you like art, just pick up a pencil. It's the cheapest kind of entertainment that there is. Just keep at it. Never criticize yourself. Just keep making and making and making and making. And don't use AI because it will blow up in your face.
Oh yeah. Yeah, good point.
Excellent.
Yeah, would you say, Chris, you're human made as well, right? You're not doing any AI stuff.
I am 100% human made. No, I don't engage with the AI art stuff. It gives me the creeps. Whatever. The ethics of it, all of that. It's not for me. I'm not into it. I will say I am digital only these days, but Ethan, after hearing you talk about sketchbooks, it does make me want to get back into a sketchbook pretty badly.
Yeah, I'm 90% digital at these points, but I tell you, that 10% clears out the cobwebs.
Yeah, I also go back and forth. Again, more from a writing and speculative cartography perspective, but I try to write on the computer because it saves me so much time. I'm still typing up. I wrote a whole book in a notebook by hand and was so proud of myself. And now I have to type it up, and it's great for editing. It works really well, except that it takes like 15 times longer. So, but yeah, I love that advice, Ethan. I really love that advice. Beyond AI, which yes, fuck AI, but just
had to get my digs in.
Yeah, no, but if you want to draw, just draw, right? And don't beat yourself up.
Thing.
Just have fun.
Yeah.
And any advice for RPGs specifically while we're at it?
Yeah, my advice for RPGs specifically is if you've played them at all, while you read and while you play them, and you'd like to draw stuff from RPGs, or you'd like to do that sort of work, pay attention to how you're feeling when you do very particular things. How it's when we think about crunch and fluff being so different from each other, but really crunch gives you feelings also. Think about the things that are feeling, and then start to think about how would you convey that feeling in art.
That is I'm laughing a lot because of that last note, but that is very good advice. Very solid.
And anytime y'all start talking about speculative cartography again, I'm in that conversation.
I was going to say that's got to be an episode unto itself.
Yeah.
Man, yeah. I think one thing that binds all RPG nerds together is a love of maps, like a deep, abiding love of map making and map reading, which I don't know what that says about us as a community, but I'm into it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, and I also think that's, again, thinking of my evil business hat, trying to make a small business work. But we have all these friends we've been lucky to make in the speculative cartography world who are really generating a lot of great content, mostly consumed by 5e D&D players. But they all are smart and look at all kinds of source material and play different kinds of games. And it would be interesting to kind of pick their brains, coming from the other direction, because I think Chris, you and I, and now Ethan, we're coming from that more OSR zine, world.
Yeah.
But some of the people doing really great work today are doing very slick stuff for people who are 99% are using them in D&D campaigns of some kind, but which is just not how. And we've talked about it, and I think we've agreed on our team. We just don't even want to compete with the battle maps. We just don't really do that.
Right.
So I do all our regional maps. Because I think it's fun. Really, it's just a relaxing thing for me. And then Ethan does the other art, and I think it's just interesting to think about the people who are doing those, that whole VTT world, which we're now stepping into since Stillfleet will be on Alchemy. But yeah, that is another conversation for another day. Speculative cartography, battle maps, those are great topics. We should definitely have more about the Sometimes Kingdom.
Yeah,
we should have some sort of we should really do a panel at a con about medieval games, actual historical stuff.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I would love that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's all to say. Thanks for joining us, Ethan, and can't wait to talk more. So I'm gonna stop broadcasting today, but we'll be back. Chris, are we doing this every week? Should we say that? Not that just when people tune in.
Yeah. Let's say that we're going to be recording every week and hopefully releasing on a weekly basis as well coming up.
Yeah, starting soon. Yeah. So every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, we'll be live on Twitch, and later we'll put up podcast versions and VODs on the YouTubes. And if you design games and you want to talk to us about designing games, specifically TTRPGs, hit us up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to stop broadcasting this.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, Ethan.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Why We Roll. Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arpline. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on Twitch and what used to be Twitter at Why We Roll, and on Instagram at whyweroll.pod.
You can find out more about Dance Macabre at timespaceplace.itch.io/dance-macabre.
You can find out more about Stillfleet at stillfleet.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, I'm Hugh from Moderation. If you like today's episode, why not check out the next session? Your D&D Agony Aunt's there to answer all of your questions. Join Adam and Alyssa as they answer questions sent in by listeners like you about how to solve the problems that come with running and playing in all sorts of different tabletop scenarios. Available wherever you get your podcast.